Hello, hello. I am Sinner and I am in a good mood today. So I hope you're all having a good mood today too. Today we're talking about book three of the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. And it's called The Two Virtues. Or just Two Virtues, sorry. And overall, it's actually very interesting. It starts off, for the most part, talking about not the two virtues, which is kind of silly. It's actually talking about at the start what classifies uh, an action as an action, because if you're going to say someone's culpable or guilty of a particular action, you have to be able to define how so they are or are not guilty of that action, right? So it talks about the fact that at first, some actions are voluntary, you choose to do them. Some are involuntary, and then some are non-voluntary, right? And the distinction, as far as I can tell, between involuntary and non-voluntary is like if something's non-voluntary, you didn't explicitly choose to do it, but you didn't choose not to do it, right? So an example might be like acting in ignorance. That's like you're not doing anything against your will, but if you do something, it's not exactly like you did it for your will either, right? Let's say, I don't know, you give someone who has an allergy, right? You give that person a peanut and they have a peanut allergy. You didn't know they they become, you know, afflicted by their peanut allergy. You didn't voluntarily, you're not like, you didn't voluntarily give them like that affliction. You didn't choose to make them sick, but you didn't not give them the peanut. You get what I'm trying to say? And it's sort of like a lot more nuanced than this, but that's like the general overview. And yeah, moral conduct has choices, which is also very important because you can't really make someone culpable if it's not a choice. Um, what else is there? At the start, yeah, it just continues to talk about deliberation, what makes a choice, these sorts of things. And to be honest, I found this part kind of boring. I didn't find it very interesting. Um, and basically, it also says we're responsible for our actions. You can't really say, like, oh, fate made me do this. One thing, actually, which I did find interesting was this paragraph where it says, a bad moral state, once formed, is not easily amended. Now, in ethics, the overarching theme is that, well, the overarching idea is that moral activity is a disposition, right? It's not a necessarily like you can't just like wake up one day and decide to be Jesus, right? You can't wake up one day and then just immediately start acting like Jesus. It's a disposition that's slowly built up over time if you choose to try and build it up, right? It's like habitual. You build up habits, you build up um, like muscles. You have to train your muscles in order to get good at it, in order to become stronger. And in the same way, you have to practice moral action in order to become more moral. And the reverse is true. So I found this kind of interesting. He basically says in this paragraph, more or less, that if you, even unwillingly, even if it's against your knowledge, you might choose to begin the habituation of immoral behaviors, right? So you might choose to do things out of ignorance that are unjust or immoral. But once you've started to habitually do these things, it's hard to reverse. It's very hard to reverse. Um, and you're still in a way morally culpable. And he gives this example of like basically being sick, right? If you ignore your doctors, you eat bad foods, you act in an unhealthy way, and you get sick, you're culpable insofar as you've gotten sick, but you're it's not like you can just suddenly turn it around and be healthy again. But yeah, I found that really something interesting because you see it a lot with criminals, right? And people who, let's say, start down the wrong path. You know, it's very easy to in life, in my opinion, it's very easy to stay on the right path rather than it is to get back onto the right path. It's harder to climb out of a pit than it is to just not fall in. And that's also the case with addiction, I've found. You know, especially in today's age, a lot of people are addicted to pornography. I will say I was at one point. I'm not anymore. And I would say as well, it would have 100% been way easier if I just never looked at porn in the first place. But yeah, I think that was very interesting, that bit. I was actually like very happy to see that. I was like, wow, that's so true. You know, like the little soy jack. So true. Um, yeah, and then he goes and continues to talk about, you know, oh, okay, well, virtue is voluntary, so is vice. And sometimes a good moral disposition is more of like a natural talent rather than a, you know, a something that is just like you choose to do, which is also true. Some people are just naturally more moral than others, and it has something maybe partially to do with nature. It's not all nurture. But then after that, by the end of the book, he gets into the two virtues, which he talks about, which are courage and temperance. First one was courage. And basically, this part is just sort of outlining what exactly courage is, and then going into detail about what it isn't, different types, you know, like he talks about the difference between being rash and being courageous. You know, if you're rash, you're sort of like ignorantly overconfident, whereas if you're courageous, you actually are aware and, you know, more tempered, I guess you could say, and you're not um you're genuinely like not afraid, whereas if you're rash, it's more of like an emotional wildness, you could say, right? And he calls the Celts rash, which isn't very nice because I'm half Celtic. Not very nice. He says, I mean, it's fair enough because they did run around naked and go to war. Yeah, he says here, a person who carries fearlessness too far has no distinctive name, but if he were afraid of nothing, not even of an earthquake or inundation, as they say of the Celts, he would be a maniac or insensate. The man who exceeds in confidence about things that are fearful is rash. The rash man is considered to be both a boaster and a pretender to courage. At any rate, he wishes to seem as the courageous man really is in his attitude towards fearful situations, and therefore imitates him where he can. Yeah, he also goes on to say, like, rash people, when they're actually faced with the 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 troubles or situations that are going to befall on them, they become fearful. So it's like a fake courage. And yeah, what else does he talk about in regards to courage? He goes into like different things about it, you know, like spirit or metal. You know, he also said like if you're ignorant of the folly, like or the risks, it's not really courage. And he talks about experience of risk as well, how that's a form of courage, which makes sense. You know, I surf, and one of the things about surfing is you're afraid of bigger waves, right? But once you surf enough big waves, you stop being afraid of them. And that's the case with all types of sport that's dangerous, right? Once you experience the risk enough, you stop being afraid of it. And then he goes into what the last bit is, which is temperance. And I think temperance is an interesting thing because it's sort of a value that's simultaneously um, respected but not at the same time in our culture today. Like, I think people want temperance because they want to have the discipline to get to a point where they can be licentious, if that makes sense. So, like, how do I put this? Like, take your Andrew Tate, Sigma, rich kid, like, hustle type kid, right? They want to be like these super disciplined Sigma males. But the only reason they want to be a super disciplined Sigma male is so that way they can party and drink and drive around in Lambos and snort coke, right? So they don't actually want temperance. They want the end goal that temperance requires. So it's kind of interesting because yeah, in our society, it's sort of respected, but at the same time, it's sort of not. But yeah, he talks about temperance here, and he goes into all the different ways that he mainly talks about. He talks a lot about licentiousness more than temperance, to be honest. Um, but yeah, he talks about like being indulgent, how most forms of licentiousness are to do with taste and touch. Talks about how it's more voluntary than cowardness, which is true. It is because it's a choice, it's an active choice. Whereas sort of fear is a response, a natural response, whereas uh, licentiousness is an active choice to indulge desire. Yeah, I've tagged bits, but I'm not going to read all that out because that's way too long. What else have we got in here, which was interesting? Yeah, that the fact that they're like spoilt children is what he ends it on. Licentious kids, people are like spoilt children, which I kind of agree with. And this has gone on for long enough, so I'm going to leave you guys with a quote at the very end of book 3, Two Virtues, which is this. Um, so the desir, desiderative, I can't say that word, sorry, element in us ought to be controlled by rational principle. Thus, the desiderative element of the temperate man ought to be in harmony with the rational principle, because both have the same object, the attainment of what is admirable. Also, the temperate man desires the right things in the right way and at the right time. This this also is prescribed by the rational principle. So much for our account of temperance. And I like that quote at the end because it reminds me of something that Christians talk about, which is that uh, it's not man's soul that's conquering the body. You know, it's not when you're trying to sanctify yourself. It's not that you're trying to make yourself, what would you say, like a purely rational being, like a computer or a robot. Rather, you're trying to bring into harmony your rational soul, your spirituality, and your spirit with your body. And part of that isn't, ignoring your desires or ignoring your let's say innate physical or animalistic urges or what have you. It's bringing it into harmony with the soul, into the rational principle. So it's not that you're trying to get rid of the desire to have sex or the desire to eat or the desire to be loved or whatever it is. It's you're trying to put it into its correct place. Because, and this is something about licentiousness and all the virtues and all the corresponding sins or follies, is that it's not the fact that you have a particular urge or emotion that's the problem. It's when it's in too much or too little. And that's what is talked about a lot in Aristotle, this idea of the mean. So, there is a right time to be angry, and there's a right time to be sad, and there's a right time to be sexually aroused, and there's a right time to be hungry, right? But if you're hungry and if you feel hungry and you have a full belly, that's a problem, right? If you're sad when there's nothing to be sad about, that's a problem. If you're afraid when there's nothing to fear, or when you're sexually attracted to someone other than your wife or your married partner, that's a problem, right? So it's not the desires that's at play, it's the desires in the wrong place and at the wrong time. And yeah, I think that's where I'll end it here. Thank you so much for listening. I am listener. And for the 10 viewers that seem to pop onto my videos, thanks for watching. I enjoy seeing that I get 10 views. Bye bye.